Maryland basketball needs to add Dug McDaniel.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, video content creator for 247 Sports and InsideMarylandSports.com, and host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Maryland basketball needs to add Dug McDaniel in the portal. The portal is open, and it's officially portal season for Maryland basketball. And I know this season just ended on a horrible note after getting absolutely demolished by a good Wisconsin team, a Wisconsin team that's in the tournament, a Wisconsin team that could go on a run in the tournament in March Madness. I think they have that type of makeup of a team. But overall, a terrible season. I mean, I've talked about it. And for the most of the last couple of weeks, I've talked about it almost every single day, how bad this Maryland team has been this year and how poorly that they performed throughout the year. The roster wasn't constructed right. It never really came together, and everybody knows how much worse it could possibly get going into next year. But this is fixable. And a guy like Dug McDaniel can fix this. There's plenty of other guys. I just want to highlight one at a time instead of just going in and talking about like 6 possible guys. Like, I want to talk about one guy at a time that I think Maryland could potentially add that can really help, really fix us going into next year, because there honestly is a lot of different, really interesting type of players actually in the portal right now for that Maryland basketball could potentially add, especially in the DMV area. But like I said, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I don't know how fast these guys come off the board. I'll make sure to update you guys. But there's guys that went to like Ivy League schools. There's guys like Malik Mack who went to Harvard, or Perkins kid that went to Penn. 2 guys that are from the DMV that went to Malik Mack went to St. John's, and then Perkins went to Landon, 2 DMV schools right in the backyard of Maryland. And then, of course, the one I'm talking about today is Maryland needs to add Dug McDaniel. And there's a couple of other local guys that are in the portal, so it's interesting. I would like to think that Maryland is in the hunt for a lot of these different type of guys. But I want to talk about Dug McDaniel, which I have said a couple times. But I think he makes a lot of sense for the Terps. It makes sense to me, at least. Let me know if you guys think Dug McDaniel would be a good kind of player to add to this Maryland team. I really like Dug, and I like his game. And many of you guys know Dug McDaniel because we've played him. We've played him a couple times a year or once a year, whatever it is, against Michigan when we've played them. We've played Dug McDaniel. I think one game where we played them, he was suspended, which was a weird kind of situation. I don't know why, but he got suspended for only road games. I don't know if he was doing something on the road he was supposed to be doing. I don't know. I have really no idea what that suspension was for. But I think he makes a lot of sense for the Maryland Terrapins, for both sides, not just for Dug, not just for Maryland. I think it makes a lot of sense for both sides. I don't know the exact reason he left. I'm going to assume it's because Joan Howard is gone now and out as the Michigan coach. If you guys didn't hear that news, yes, he's out. I don't know really what I thought of Howard. I thought he was an interesting type of coach. I thought at a point he was recruiting at a really high level. I didn't know how good of an actual coach he was, but this Michigan program was in the dumps. So they were one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. I think they won like 3 Big Ten games, by far the worst. And Maryland was tied for the second worst, and they won like 7. So we won more than double their amount of Big Ten wins Maryland did. So you know that Maryland, with having a bad year, imagine how bad of a year it was for Michigan. So to me, it made sense for the reason that Dug McDaniel's gone, whether it's a fit issue, whether it's just the program's not very good, whether it's Howard leaving. It really did make sense for Dug McDaniel to leave because he's not the only one that's going to leave. I bet multiple players will transfer for them. This kid, Keani Bru, actually decommitted, which is another interesting thing. I don't know if we're really in play for him, but he was a high-level 5-star, 4-star type of player committed to Michigan that's from the DMV area as well. And Maryland was in the battle for him for a while too. So I wonder if we get back and play for him. I'm not saying that happens, but that's another little interesting part of the whole Michigan decommitting process and people leaving the program. But I like Dug's game. I think he has a diverse game. I think he has a diverse skill set. But I think it just kind of makes sense for Maryland to go after Dug. Let me give you a couple of reasons it makes sense. I keep telling you guys it makes sense, but haven't really gave you a ton of reason. I just told you why it made sense for him to leave Michigan, but why does it make sense for us to add a guy like this and for him to come to Maryland? First of all, we really need anyone we can get. Just to start right there, we need anyone that's really talented that we can get. This team was horrible this year, and adding a guy like Dug McDaniel that is like a all Big Ten type of player, like this is a guy that has proven himself in the Big Ten. This isn't a guy like some of the guys I mentioned, like Malik Mack or the Perkins kid that played in the Ivy League, which is quite frankly not as good competition. And yes, they put up really good numbers as freshmen and all that type of stuff, but at the end of the day, they didn't play in the Big Ten. They didn't play in the SEC. They didn't play in the Big 12. This guy proved himself over the last 2 years in the Big Ten, and it's the exact same league that Maryland plays in. So we know overall that Dug McDaniel can play on the level that the Maryland Terrapins need him to play. We also absolutely need guard play right now. I think right now that's probably our biggest kind of need overall in terms of in the portal. With Jamir Young being gone, first team all Big Ten, one of the best Maryland seasons ever. Jamir Young gave us like 21 points per game. That's 21 points that you have to replace on a team that had trouble scoring the ball already. There was times when he absolutely carried the load offensively, and I think it's going to hurt Maryland a lot if they go from Jamir Young to a point guard that's like, maybe he's decent, maybe he can score a little bit, but he's not quite as explosive as a scorer as Jamir Young is. And I think Dug McDaniel isn't quite Jamir Young in terms of what he did last year, but think about it. Jamir Young just put up that type of performance for Maryland as a senior. And as his last year in college basketball, Dug McDaniel's just a sophomore, and he's still doing a lot of those big things that we saw Jamir Young do before his last season at Maryland. It's similar numbers between Dug McDaniel last year, his sophomore year, and Jamir Young's junior year at Maryland. So replacing him with Dug going into his junior year, Dug McDaniel going into his junior year could make a lot of sense with him averaging 16.3 points per game and 4.7 assists for Michigan. And that was with him being probably the number one priority for who you want to stop on defense. That Michigan team didn't have a whole lot. They didn't have a whole lot of guys that could score the ball. They just didn't have a whole lot on that team. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, to go after a guy that's used to having pressure on him. And I think he's the type of guy that we want, a guy that can score the ball overall. And then he's also from the DMV area. That's one of the biggest reasons I'm mentioning him. If he wasn't from the DMV area, I don't know if I would be saying his name. But that's a big reason why I think we're going to be in it for him. I think why we have a really good shot at landing him. Is because if he wants to come home, which could make sense after spending 2 years at Michigan and leaving, you might want to come back to what you're used to and you might want to come home. That could make a lot of sense for Dug McDaniel. So him being from the DMV area, Maryland absolutely needing a point guard, and he knows he can come in and be one of the guys for us right away with our returning talent overall. But he attended PVI. A lot of you guys know PVI, a basketball powerhouse in the DMV area. And I also like that he can shoot the ball. He shot nearly about 35% both years at Michigan, so he can shoot the ball really well. He's a good shot and is definitely shooting a solid percentage, which Maryland needs. Maryland needs shooters. I think that's quite clear with the Maryland team. And then also he has 2 years left of eligibility, which I also think could really help this Maryland team. Not just getting a guy that can come for 1 year, but a guy that can really help for 2 years. I don't know exactly who's in the mix for him right now. I think it's a little bit too early. I bet a bunch of schools reach out to him, but Dug McDaniel's absolutely a guy that Maryland basketball could use. Now that the basketball season is over, I want to go through my top 5 favorite moments. I will tell you about that after this ad from Nissan and Amazon TV. This week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024's Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. The Yukon Huskies can only be described as the Armada. The top-seeded team is as hardcore as it gets out there. So it's no wonder they've landed the top overall seed in the NCAA tournament. They're one of the favorites to win it all, despite 4 of the 6 Power 6 conference champions standing in their way in the East region. The Auburn Tigers can only be described as a Pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves after claiming the top spot in the SEC as they knocked off the Florida Gators in the SEC Tournament Championship. They're set to make a run in the NCAA tournament, and the Oregon Ducks are obviously this week's Nissan Rogue. The team absolutely surprised us all with a powerful performance to the final Pac-12 tournament, punching their ticket to the big dance. They say win life, go Rogue, and that's exactly what the Bucks have done here. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Fire TV is your destination for sports. From live games to highlights to in-depth analysis, Fire TV offers amazing viewing experience with smart TVs as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes as well as free and live TV. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels lets you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports. March Madness, NBA, MLB, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Let's go through my top 5 favorite moments from this year's college basketball season for the Maryland Terrapins. Even though it was a disappointing year and sometimes I can be a kind of a negative guy, I still want to recognize my top 5 favorite moments of this year's team because there's always positives to a season. There's always stuff that goes wrong. There's always stuff that goes right, and it's important to acknowledge the good things that happen, even though it was a bad season, because at the end of the day, they try hard to win games. So here are my top 5 combination of kind of wins and performances of my favorite games and performances of this year. Starting with number 5 is our first Big Ten win against Penn State. I really like this win for us, and it's a big reason why it's number 5 is because it did go to overtime, and it was an intense game. It was a game that I felt like we needed to have. It was earlier on the season, so you're not counted out for anything yet, whether it's a Big Ten championship, whether it's a March Madness bid. Nobody really knows yet. It's too early for all that type of stuff. But one thing was kind of for sure, Maryland really needed to win that game. But it was really cool to watch Maryland beat that Penn State team in overtime for our first Big Ten win of the year. And the reason it's number 5 for me because I wasn't sure what our Maryland team was. For a little bit, I was like, can we even win a Big Ten game? Like, are we going to win a Big Ten game? I wasn't sure for a second, but after watching that game and watching that game against Penn State, I got some confidence back. I thought the team got a little bit of the swagger back after not starting off really right with the first Big Ten game against Indiana. At number 4 was the game Maryland crushing Nebraska. Looking back at it, it's a really good win for this Maryland team. I've watched this Nebraska team play a couple of times, even not against Maryland. I've watched a fair amount of Nebraska play, and they have a couple of players that are really high-end guy, like that Tominga guy, really high-level shooter. He's very annoying if you're the other team because it seems like he just makes shots at a high level, and he can just do things that, like, you shouldn't really be doing and make shots that and just overall he's just a really cool player. It's basically what I'm saying. And that Nebraska team's a tournament team right now. They're an 8 seed, I want to say. I know they're an 8 or a 9. I sometimes get the 8 and the 9s mixed up in my head, but they have a big game either on Thursday or on Friday when the March Madness tournament starts. I know that's exciting for everyone watching it. Of course, I wish Maryland was in it, but that was a big win for the Terps. Not only beating Nebraska, but we crushed a team that's a March Madness team. We beat them 53-71. It showed that we did have some tools. We did have some potential, but we just didn't put it all together the entire year. But that win against Nebraska really showed me that, like, we can beat some solid Big Ten teams for sure. It's not even like that. We're a lot worse than everybody. I just didn't think we put it together, and I just didn't think we had the shooting to compete in a lot of games. But that was definitely one of my favorite games, having a game that wasn't a sweat while also beating a really good team. Number 3 performance might surprise people, but it's Deshawn Harris-Smith's performance against Iowa to help beat them. He had 17 points, a career high. Still his career high. I just said career high like 5 times right there. But it's his career high in terms of points. And I really want to highlight this because I was hard on Deshawn Harris-Smith at times because I thought it wasn't really coming together quite like I probably wanted it to, quite like the Maryland fans really wanted it to. But Deshawn Harris-Smith just played hard every single game. And watching him improve, couldn't really ask for much more. I know he's going to be back next year. He's not entering the portal. I'm almost certain about that. So it's great to have him back because I know how hard he's going to work to fix some of the stuff that he needs to continue to work on. But I really love that win against Iowa, and I thought Deshawn Harris-Smith was a huge reason dropping 17 points. He hadn't been much of a scorer the entire year. So him having a breakout day and just proving to us and probably himself that, yeah, like, I'm that guy. I can do this for Maryland, and they're going to need me to do it next year, but I can do this, was really cool for me to see and definitely a top 3 favorite moment for me. Number 2, another individual performance kind of combined with the team performance, I guess, was Maryland going on the road to UCLA and Jamir Young dropping 37 to keep kind of our season alive and our out-of-conference from not looking like, oh my gosh, we just absolutely did terrible in our out-of-conference, quite frankly. There wasn't a lot of opportunities to get good wins, and UCLA was definitely one of the only ones. And Jamir Young said, you guys all get on my back. I'm going to carry us in this game, dropping 37. And there's so many different Jamir Young performances that maybe one day I'll talk about that, the performances that Jamir Young had that were really cool. But this performance was definitely one of his best, if not his best, but almost dropping 40 points. That's a big boy type of game from Jamir Young. And number 1 is the Terps upsetting Illinois. This was my favorite moment of the year for the Terps. And I think you guys probably knew that this was number 1. Beating a team like Illinois, which honestly I'm kind of thinking about having them in my Final Four because I think Illinois is a really good team with those 2 guards, Dome Sack and Terrence Shannon. And Terrence Shannon didn't play against us, but still, it was super cool beating a team that I think at the time was 10th in the country. Beating an Illinois team like that, I thought was a really big-time win for the Maryland Terrapins. And that overall was my top 5 moments. Another key Maryland transfer happens. I will tell you about this player that just hit the portal. I will tell you about that after this ad from FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. I know you guys all love March Madness if you're listening to this, so make sure you download FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Maryland player, big man Swan Rogers decided to enter the portal for Maryland basketball. And honestly, I'm okay with this one. I didn't think there was much there for us, and I think it was good for both sides. Swan Rogers never really found his rhythm with this Maryland basketball team. It never really looked right. It never looked like he kind of felt comfortable with the game plan and with how we kind of used him. It never felt like he was able to find that gear that we wanted him to get to, that we recruited him to be. And I think it's to his advantage to leave and try somewhere else. And he was one of the guys before that I totally expected had a really good possibility of leaving. It makes sense for him to leave. You had Julian Reese ahead of you, and then Derek Queen's coming in, and he's not a guy that Maryland saw as ever a guy that I think would be like a solid starter for them. I think they always thought of him as kind of a bench piece. So I think it made sense for him to transfer, and I think he's going to be able to go somewhere else. And instead of playing a backup role for Maryland, I think he's going to go somewhere else and be able to be a starter. It won't be probably at like one of these big basketball conference schools, but it's going to be somewhere maybe a little bit smaller school, but he'll be able to start and potentially average maybe 10 points, 10 rebounds a game, and play many more minutes to be able to showcase his skills, and who knows what can happen with that. But I think it's good for both sides. I think for him, he's going to get a better opportunity somewhere else. I think it's best for him to go somewhere else where he can just have a bigger role, and I just don't think Maryland really needed him overall, and I just don't think it ever really worked. He had some tools, he had some size, he had some cool stuff going on for him coming out of high school, but it just never seemed like it was there. He definitely gave us some solid minutes in some games, but he just never found his rhythm as a player. And I also think it helps the Terps because it opens up another spot in the portal, and we probably need as many spots as we can get in the portal. So I wouldn't be surprised to see someone else leave. I think that's definitely a possibility. There's definitely other people that could probably hit the portal. Jonathan Lamoth posted an interesting picture with him and Noah Bachelor. I don't really know, but maybe he could enter. I think there's a big shot that basically anybody could enter except probably Kaiser and Deshawn Harris-Smith. Besides those two, I wouldn't be surprised if anybody else really enters the portal. But I do think it's good that it opens up a spot for Maryland. I think Callum will be good. I do think he'll be good somewhere else. He has the size and talent. It just never came together. But there are some things he needs to work on. I think he's been kind of an offensive liability. I think he needs to get more of a post game. I think he can develop that. Maybe he has that, but Maryland just never really asked him to do that. I think he should be able to do that at a little bit more of a higher level. I think he needs to also learn how to stay out of foul trouble. Anytime Maryland will play him at least somewhat big-time minutes, he'd always find himself in foul trouble, and that was really frustrating because it was like, okay, we already have Julian Reese who's committing a good amount of fouls, but we can't have two guys and two bigs that are committing fouls that you just probably can't really have overall. So I'm happy that he's kind of in the portal for him because I think there's better opportunities elsewhere. We'll see what happens with it. But that's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked on Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. Good luck with your brackets this season. We'll see how mine comes out. Maybe I'll share my winner and maybe my Final Four on another day. I would love to talk about that, but we'll see what happens overall. But thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.